Imagine a silence so deep, so all-encompassing, that it swallows the sound of your own breath. It is a silence that stretches across continents, a heavy, muffled blanket that has settled over the world for thousands of years. We are not in the present day. We have drifted back in the river of time, roughly 20,000 years into the past, to a moment when the Earth was held in the gripping, icy fist of the last glacial maximum. To stand here on the surface of the northern hemisphere is to stand upon a planet that feels almost entirely alien. The familiar greens and blues of our modern maps have been erased, replaced by a stark, blinding white that reflects the pale sun with an indifference that feels absolute. This is the stillness of the frozen world. It is a time when the chaotic, vibrant energy of life has been dampened, slowed down to a glacial crawl, waiting for a spring that feels as though it may never come. Let us cast our minds across the landscape of North America and Northern Europe, where modern cities like Chicago, Toronto, and Stockholm now teem with the noise of industry and traffic. There is only ice. But this is not the thin, fragile ice of a winter pond. This is a continental shield, a monolithic structure of frozen water that rises 3, perhaps 4 kilometers into the sky. It is a mountain range made of water, a fortress of solitude that dominates the horizon in every direction. If you were to stand at the base of this great ice sheet, looking up, it would consume the sky. It is a wall of white and brilliant blue, fissured with deep crevasses that glow with an inner sapphire light. The weight of it is almost impossible to comprehend. It is so heavy, so massively dense, that it is physically crushing the Earth's crust. The solid rock of the continent is bowing down, sinking into the mantle below, humbled by the sheer burden of the accumulated snows of 100 centuries. The air here is thin, dry, and piercingly cold. It bites at exposed skin, a relentless reminder that this is a hostile realm. Because so much of the world's water is locked up in these towering glaciers, the atmosphere itself is parched. It is a dusty world. Great winds, generated by the temperature differences between the ice and the warmer equator, scream across the barren plains south of the ice sheets. They pick up fine silt, grinding the rock into flour, and cast it into the air, creating a hazy, golden twilight that hangs over the edge of the world. In this frozen epoch, the oceans have retreated. The great thief of the water cycle, the ice, has stolen the sea. With millions of cubic kilometers of water trapped on land, the global sea levels have plummeted by more than 120 meters. The map of the Earth is drawn with different lines. The familiar islands of the British Isles are not islands at all, but merely the highlands of a vast, marshy peninsula jutting out from Europe. One could walk from what is now France to England without ever wetting one's feet, traversing a landscape of low tundra and grazing mammoths known to archaeologists as Doggerland. To the east, the Bering Strait, which today separates Russia from Alaska with cold, choppy waters, is a wide, grassy bridge. It is a highway for the resilient, a corridor of land that beckons the brave and the desperate to migrate into new worlds. The planet feels larger, more connected by land, yet paradoxically more divided by the impenetrable barriers of the ice. There is a profound beauty in this desolation. Under the light of the full moon, the ice sheets glow with a spectral luminescence. They are not static dead things, they are slow-moving rivers of solid matter. If one were patient enough, if one could watch with the eyes of a mountain, one would see the ice flowing. It creeps, it groans, it cracks, with the sound of thunder that rolls for miles across the empty plains. This is the geological heartbeat of the Ice Age, slow, rhythmic, and incredibly powerful. Beneath this frozen canopy, the land is being rewritten. The ice is a sculptor, albeit a violent one. As it moves, it drags billions of tons of rock and debris with it. It acts like coarse sandpaper against the bedrock, scouring away soil, grinding down the peaks of ancient hills, and carving out deep basins that will, in a distant future, become the Great Lakes of North America and the fjords of Norway. The landscape is being punished, stripped to its bones, prepared for a new shape that will only be revealed when the ice finally retreats. But for now, there is only the wait. Life, in this era, exists on the margins. It clings to the edges of the ice, in the refugia where the sun is just warm enough to coax grasses and hardy shrubs from the permafrost. This is the realm of the megafauna. We can imagine the woolly mammoth, a creature perfectly designed for this cold, dry world. Its shaggy coat, matted with dust and snow, hangs heavy over a layer of insulating fat. It moves with a slow, deliberate grace, its massive curved tusks sweeping the snow aside to find the dried grasses beneath. These giants are not alone. The woolly rhinoceros, the cave lion, and the dire wolf patrol these steppes. They are the lords of the tundra, evolved to thrive in a world that would freeze a modern human in hours. They are the survivors of the cold, their breath pluming in the frigid air like smoke signals. They move in silence, their footsteps muffled by the snow, playing out the eternal drama of predator and prey against a backdrop of infinite white. And what of our ancestors? They are there too, huddled in the twilight of the Ice Age. We find them in the caves of southern Europe or moving tentatively across the Asian steppes. They are small figures against the vastness of the climate. They wear the furs of the animals they hunt. They seek the warmth of fire with a religious fervor. To them, this world of ice is not a temporary anomaly. It is the only world they have ever known. The stories told around their campfires are stories of the long winter, of the white mountains that never melt, of the spirits that dwell in the howling winds. They look up at the same stars we see today. The constellation of Orion hunts in the winter sky just as he does now, indifferent to the temperature of the world below. But the aurora borealis, the northern lights, dance with a ferocity that lights up the glaciers. Sheets of green and violet fire curtain the sky, reflecting off the endless ice, until the whole world seems to be bathed in an ethereal underwater glow. It is a sight of terrifying beauty, a reminder of the magnetic forces that protect this fragile, frozen marble drifting through the dark. The psychological weight of this era is immense. In our modern lives, we are accustomed to the rapid changing of seasons, the cycle of growth and decay. But here, winter is not a season, it is a state of being. The summers are short, cool bursts of time where the surface of the ice might weep a little meltwater, only to be sealed shut again as the sun dips lower in the sky. It feels permanent. It feels eternal. To a consciousness existing in this time, it would seem impossible that this ice could ever vanish. The cold feels like the final destiny of the Earth, a thermodynamic inevitable. Yet, deep within the complex machinery of the solar system, a clock is ticking. It is a clock made not of gears and springs, but of gravity and momentum. It is the slow, wobbling gyroscopic spin of the Earth itself. We often forget that our planet is not a steady vessel. It rocks and sways as it circles the sun. Its orbit stretches from a perfect circle into a slight oval, and back again over periods of 100,000 years. Its axis, the imaginary pole around which we spin, tilts back and forth like a dying, spinning top. These movements are subtle, imperceptible to the creatures living and dying on the surface. No mammoth looks up and feels the change in the angle of the sun. No human hunter notices that the perihelion, the point where Earth is closest to the sun, is slowly shifting its date on the calendar. But the physics of the heavens are relentless. They operate on a time scale that mocks the brevity of biological life. And in the deep freeze of the last glacial maximum, these celestial mechanics are slowly, agonizingly aligning for a change. For thousands of years, the northern hemisphere has been tilted away or positioned in its orbit such that the summers were too cool to melt the winter snows. Snow piled upon snow, compressing into ice, building the white fortresses higher and higher. This is the feedback loop of the Ice Age. The more ice there is, the more sunlight is reflected back into space, the albedo effect, keeping the planet cold, which in turn allows more ice to grow. It is a self-sustaining trap of cold. However, the universe is never truly static. The great engine of the sky is turning. The Earth's axis is beginning to tilt back. The orbit is shifting. Very slowly, the amount of solar energy falling on the high latitudes of the north is beginning to increase. It is not a sudden blast of heat. It is a whisper of warmth, a fractional increase in the intensity of the sunlight hitting the top of the ice sheets. But in a system as balanced and tension-filled as a frozen planet, even a whisper can start an avalanche. Consider the sheer stillness before the change. Stand once more on the edge of the Laurentide Ice Sheet, near what will one day be the border of Canada and the United States. The wind has died down. The sky is a piercing, crystalline blue. The silence is absolute. There is no running water, no rustle of leaves, only the creak of the ice settling under its own weight. It is a world in suspension, a world holding its breath. The water molecules trapped in the ice have been there for 10,000 years, locked in a crystal lattice, unable to move, unable to flow, unable to join the sea. They are prisoners of the climate, but energy is coming. It is traveling 150 million kilometers across the vacuum of space, radiating from our yellow star. It strikes the upper atmosphere, filters through the thin, dry air, and touches the surface of the ice. At first, nothing happens. The ice reflects the energy away, fighting back with its blinding whiteness. But the sun persists. Day after day, century after century, the summers grow imperceptibly longer, imperceptibly warmer. The balance of power, held so firmly by the cold for so long, is beginning to tremble. This is the moment of maximum tension. The planet is like a dam filled to the brim, a bow pulled back to its limit. The potential energy stored in these glaciers is staggering. Enough gravitational energy to carve canyons, enough chemical energy to restart the biosphere, enough water to drown the coastlines of the world. It is all there, locked in the white vault, waiting for the key to turn. There is a profound melancholy in looking back at this frozen world. We know what is coming. We know that this stillness is the calm before the most violent transformation in human history. We know that the woolly mammoth is grazing on borrowed time, that the land bridges are destined to sink beneath the waves, that the very shape of the continents is about to change. But the Earth does not know this yet. The Earth only knows the cold. It knows the stability of the ice. It knows the silence. As we prepare to leave this frozen epoch, and move forward in time, we must appreciate the magnitude of the task ahead. Recovering from an ice age is not a simple matter of melting snow. It is a traumatic, chaotic, and violent rebirth. It involves the reorganization of the entire planetary surface. It is a global upheaval that will shake the foundations of the ecosystem. The recovery of the planet is a story of water. Water in all its forms, solid, liquid, vapor. It is a story of how the Earth remembers its liquid past and fights to return to it. But before the roar of the rushing floods and the rising seas, we must linger for one last moment in the quiet. Feel the cold against your face. Listen to the wind whistling over the curvature of the Earth. Look out over the white expanse that stretches to the horizon, unbroken, pristine, terrible in its beauty. It is a kingdom of ice, ruling with a cold, iron grip. But look up. Look towards the south. The sun is a little higher today than it was a millennium ago. The angle is changing. The celestial clockwork has clicked past the midnight of the Ice Age. The dawn is coming, and when it arrives, it will bring with it a power that not even 3 kilometers of solid ice can withstand. The great thaw is about to begin. To understand the end of the ice, we must first look away from the Earth. We must cast our gaze upward, beyond the frozen plains and the white-capped mountains, into the velvet darkness of the void. It is there in the silent, frictionless expanse of space that the fate of the glaciers is decided. We often think of our climate as something contained within the atmosphere, a local drama of wind, rain, and cloud. But the true architect of the Earth's seasons, the conductor of its great climatic symphonies, is the geometry of the heavens. Imagine for a moment that we can accelerate the passage of time. Let us speed up the clock until centuries pass in the blink of an eye. If we were to watch the Earth from a vantage point high above the North Pole, we would see that our planet is not a steady, unshakable object. It is restless. It dances. Like a child's spinning top that has begun to lose its momentum, the Earth wobbles as it spins. This wobble is slow, taking roughly 26,000 years to complete a single circle. Simultaneously, the planet nods. Its axis, the imaginary line running through the poles, tilts back and forth, bowing towards the sun, and then pulling away in a cycle that lasts 41,000 years. And even the path we trace around the sun is not constant. It breathes, stretching from a near-perfect circle into a slight oval, and back again over 100,000 years. These are the Milankovitch cycles, the celestial clockwork that governs the pulse of the ice ages. They are subtle, elegant movements, governed by the gravitational tug-of-war between the Earth, the Sun, the Moon, and the massive giants of Jupiter and Saturn. To a human living a brief life on the surface, the Sun appears constant. But to the planet itself, the Sun is a variable force. As the last glacial maximum stretches on, the gears of this cosmic machine begin to align in a specific, fateful configuration. The Earth's axis begins to tilt more aggressively. The northern hemisphere, which has been hiding in the shadows for so long, starts to lean closer to the central fire of the solar system. The orbit shifts, bringing the planet slightly nearer to the star during the northern summer. It is not a sudden change. There is no great flash of light, no immediate catastrophe. It is a soft, gradual increase in the intensity of the solar gaze. The sun hangs in the sky for a few minutes longer each day. Its rays strike the ice at a slightly more direct angle, delivering just a fraction more energy than they did the millennium before. It is a gentle caress, a whisper of heat returning to a frozen world. But in the delicate thermodynamics of a glacial planet, a whisper is enough to wake the sleeping giants. Return now to the surface of the great ice sheet. For thousands of years, this landscape has been defined by its ability to reject the sun. The whiteness of the ice is its armor. It acts as a perfect mirror, reflecting nearly all the solar radiation back into space, keeping the surface cold and preserving the frozen status quo. This is the albedo effect, the shield that has kept the Earth locked in winter. But as the celestial alignment shifts, the summer sun becomes just strong enough to overwhelm this defense. The change begins on the microscopic level. Between the crystals of ice, the bonds that hold the solid water together begin to vibrate. The temperature of the surface snow rises, inching closer to that critical, magical threshold of 0 degrees Celsius. It is a threshold that separates rock-hard permanence from fluid chaos. The first sign of the thaw is not a flood, but a change in texture. The surface of the glacier, once dry and powdery as a desert, becomes slick. The snow becomes heavy, wet and granular. It loses its brilliant, blinding white sheen and takes on a duller, grayer hue. This darkening is fatal. Darker colors absorb heat rather than reflecting it. As the ice grays, it invites the sun in. It begins to consume the very warmth that will destroy it. Small depressions in the ice fill with meltwater. These are the first azure eyes opening on the face of the frozen continent. These pools are incredibly beautiful, sapphire blue, startlingly clear, and bitterly cold. But they are also engines of destruction. Water absorbs heat far more efficiently than ice. A pool of water sitting on top of a glacier acts like a hot coal placed on a block of wax. It burns its way down. Listen closely. The silence of the Ice Age is ending. At first, it is a sound so faint you might mistake it for the wind. It is the sound of dripping, a single drop, then another, then a steady rhythm. The drops join together to form tiny rivulets, spiderwebbing across the surface of the ice. These rivulets seek the path of least resistance, obeying the pull of gravity, flowing into the cracks and crevasses that scar the glacier's back. The sound grows. The trickle becomes a gurgle, then a rush. Deep inside the glacier, the water begins to drill vertical shafts known as moulins. These are terrifying, cylindrical waterfalls that plunge hundreds of meters into the heart of the ice. The water cascades down into the darkness, carrying the heat of the sun deep into the belly of the frozen beast. When this meltwater reaches the bottom, where the ice meets the bedrock, something profound happens. The water acts as a lubricant. For thousands of years, the friction between the massive weight of the ice and the rough stone of the continent has held the glaciers in place. They have been stuck, frozen to the ground. But now, floating on a high-pressure cushion of pressurized water, the ice begins to slide. The great static monuments of the frozen world become mobile. The glacier accelerates. It groans and shudders as it lurches forward, grinding the earth beneath it with renewed violence. The tension that has built up over centuries is released in sudden, jerking movements that send tremors through the ground, ice quakes that ripple through the frozen crust. But the sun is not acting alone. As the northern hemisphere warms, the entire atmospheric system of the planet begins to reorganize. The ocean, that vast reservoir of heat and gas, joins the rebellion against the cold. In the southern oceans, the deep currents are shifting. As the sea warms, it begins to exhale. For millennia, the cold oceans have held vast quantities of carbon dioxide trapped in their depths. Now, as the circulation patterns change, this gas bubbles up to the surface and is released into the atmosphere. It is an invisible reinforcement. The carbon dioxide acts as a blanket, trapping the heat that the Earth tries to radiate back into space. The greenhouse effect kicks in, amplifying the warming triggered by the sun. It is a feedback loop of planetary proportions. The sun starts the melting darkens the ice, the dark ice absorbs more heat, the oceans release gas, and the atmosphere warms, causing more melting. The system has tipped past the point of no return. Imagine standing on the edge of the ice sheet during this transition. It is a time of strange, haunting beauty. The air is thick with fog, born from the clash of cold ice and warm air. The light is diffuse and soft. The world smells different. It smells of wet stone, of ozone, of old dust being washed clean. To the ancient humans witnessing this, it must have been a time of confusing omens. The herds of reindeer and mammoth they follow are moving further north, chasing the retreating cold. The familiar routes are blocked by new rivers that appear overnight. The solid ground they trusted is turning into slush and mud. The spirits of the winter seem to be losing their battle against the spirits of the sun. We can picture a solitary figure wrapped in furs, standing on a ridge watching a glacier that has stood for 10,000 years. But today, the face of the glacier is changing. A massive block of ice the size of a cathedral shears off the front of the wall. It falls in slow motion, crashing into the meltwater lake below, with a roar that shakes the chest. A plume of white spray rises hundreds of meters into the air. This is the process of calving, the violent disintegration of the ice margin. It is the sound of the retreat. The White Empire is crumbling at its edges. However, this process is not a straight line. The climate does not simply move from cold to hot in a smooth upward curve. It stutters, it hesitates. There are moments when the melt releases so much fresh water into the North Atlantic that it shuts down the ocean currents that bring warmth from the tropics. The world plunges back into a temporary, deep freeze, a final, desperate gasp of the ice age known as the Younger Dryas. For 1,000 years, the cold returns. The glaciers stop their retreat and advance once more. The forests that had begun to creep north die back. It is a reminder of the volatility of the Earth's systems, a warning that the recovery is fragile. But the celestial mechanics are relentless. The Earth is still tilted towards the sun. The orbit is still favorable for warmth. The temporary freeze cannot last against the weight of the solar system's geometry. The heat returns, stronger than before. The final collapse begins. The sheer volume of water being released is difficult to comprehend. We are talking about millions of cubic kilometers of ice turning into liquid. Where does it go? It cannot stay on the land. It seeks the ocean. The great basins of North America and Europe begin to fill. Lake Agassiz, a colossal body of fresh water, larger than any lake in the modern world, forms in the heart of North America. It is a sea of meltwater, dammed up by the retreating walls of ice. It holds enough water to raise global sea levels by meters. It sits there, a ticking time bomb of liquid pressure, pushing against the weakening dams of ice and moraine. The atmosphere, now warmer and wetter, becomes more energetic. Storms of unprecedented ferocity sweep across the continents. The dry, dusty winds of the glacial maximum are replaced by torrential rains. These rains fall on the decaying ice, drilling millions of holes into its surface, turning the glaciers into rotting honeycombs of slush. The majestic, monolithic silence is gone. The world is now a place of noise. The roar of rushing water, the crack of breaking ice, the howl of the wind, the thunder of storms. It is a chaotic, messy, violent rebirth. The planet is waking up, and it is waking up thrashing. As we watch the ice retreat, we must recognize the scale of what is happening. This is not just a change in weather. It is the end of an epoch. The weight of the ice is lifting, and the Earth's crust is beginning to spring back, rebounding from the pressure that held it down for so long. The land itself is rising, shaking off the burden of the cold. The sun, the tilt, the wobble, these silent, distant forces have done their work. They have unlocked the water. They have broken the seal. The frozen stasis is over. The era of liquid has begun. And with the return of the water comes the greatest transformation of all. The reshaping of the map, the rising of the tides. The water is coming home to the sea, and nothing will stand in its way. The trickle has become a flood, and the flood will become a deluge that will drown the memories of the Ice Age under fathoms of blue. We are now standing on the precipice of the great melt. The celestial clockwork continues to turn, indifferent to the chaos it has unleashed below. But down here on the surface, the drama is only just beginning. The ice is dying, and from its death, a new world is struggling to be born. If you were to place your ear against the bedrock of the continents during this tumultuous transition, you would hear a new vibration. It is a low-frequency rumble, a bass note that resonates through the crust of the planet. It is no longer the cracking groan of shifting ice, nor the howling soprano of the polar winds. It is the sound of the earth weeping. It is the sound of water, billions of tons of it on the move. We have entered the era of the deluge. As the sun continues its relentless work and the atmospheric thermostat climbs, the great thaw accelerates from a trickle into a cascade. The water that has been locked away in the crystalline vaults of the north is now demanding its freedom. It seeks the lowest point, the path of least resistance, obeying the ancient and unforgiving laws of gravity. But this is not a gentle return to the sea. The geography of the Ice Age left behind a landscape littered with traps. As the glaciers retreated, they did not vanish instantly. They left behind massive, decaying ramparts of ice, dams that blocked the natural drainage channels of the continents. Behind these walls of frozen water, colossal lakes began to form. Consider the ghost of Lake Agassiz. In the heart of North America, covering vast swathes of what is now Manitoba, Ontario, and Minnesota, a body of water gathered that was larger than all the modern Great Lakes combined. It was an inland freshwater sea, cold, dark, and turbid with glacial flour. It was held in place not by rock or concrete, but by the retreating flank of the Laurentide Ice Sheet. For centuries, the lake grew. It swallowed forests, drowned hills, and pressed against its icy prison with the weight of 1 billion storms. The tension along the ice dam was palpable, a physical stress that groaned in the night. The water wanted out, and eventually, physics demanded it. The failure of an ice dam is one of the most violent events in nature. It does not leak, it shatters. Imagine the moment the dam breaks. It likely begins with a deep shudder, a fracture propagating through the ice at the speed of sound. Then, the wall gives way. The release is catastrophic. A wall of water, hundreds of meters high, bursts forth with the energy of 1,000 nuclear detonations. This is a mega flood. It tears across the landscape, stripping the soil down to the bare bedrock in minutes. It plucks boulders the size of houses from the ground, and rolls them along like pebbles in a stream. The friction of the water is so intense that it creates cavitation bubbles that implode with the force of sledgehammers, pulverizing the stone. In the chaotic topography of the American Northwest, similar floods, the Missoula floods, carved the channeled scablands. If you walk there today, you see a scarred alien landscape of dry waterfalls 5 times the width of Niagara, and deep, winding canyons cut through solid basalt. These are the fossilized footprints of a river that existed for only a few weeks, but flowed with 10 times the volume of all the rivers on Earth combined. To a human witness standing on a high ridge, this event would have been incomprehensible. The noise would have been deafening, a roar that erased all thought. The ground would have shook violently. A horizon of white foam and brown mud would have rushed forward, consuming the world. It was a display of raw, kinetic energy that underscored how fragile the solid earth really is when faced with the anger of water. But while these mega-floods were spectacular, violent punctuations in the history of the thaw, the true reshaping of the world was happening more quietly, more relentlessly, and on a global scale. Far from the violent outbursts of the glacial lakes, the oceans were rising. For thousands of years, the coastlines had been stable. The beach was where it was. Generations of humans had lived, hunted, and died within sight of the same shoreline. They had built their camps on the wide, flat coastal plains that stretched out towards the distant waves. To them, the sea was a constant neighbor. But now, the neighbor was encroaching. This process, known to geologists as the marine transgression, was the slow-motion drowning of the world. The sea level did not rise like a bathtub filling up evenly. It came in pulses, driven by the erratic melting of the great ice sheets. There were centuries where the water rose meters in a single lifetime, a terrifying pace for a coastal civilization. Let us drift over to Europe, to a land that no longer exists. In the southern part of the North Sea, between modern-day Britain and the Netherlands, lay the great plain of Doggerland. It is difficult for the modern mind to accept that this patch of gray, turbulent ocean was once the heart of Europe. It was a paradise, a vast, low-lying tundra that slowly transitioned into a rich, marshy woodland as the climate warmed. It was the Serengeti of the north. Herds of red deer, aurochs, and wild horses grazed on the lush grasses. Rivers meandered lazily through the plains, teeming with pike and salmon. And humans lived here. We know this because every so often, a fishing trawler in the North Sea pulls up a mammoth bone, a harpoon point carved from antler, or a human skull stained brown by the peat. These are the relics of a drowned Atlantis, a Stone Age civilization that thrived in the valley that is now the sea. Watch the tragedy of Doggerland unfold over generations. It begins with the marshes getting wetter. The rivers start to back up, unable to drain into a rising ocean. The salt water begins to creep upstream, poisoning the roots of the great oak and birch trees. The forests die, leaving behind skeletal gray trunks that stand like monuments in the expanding bogs. The people are forced to retreat. They abandon their ancestral hunting grounds, moving to the higher ground of the British hills or the European mainland. They look back and see the white caps of the ocean breaking over, the hills where they once camped. The stories of the flood become central to their culture, tales of a great water that eats the land, of a world that is shrinking. Eventually, the water rises high enough to breach the chalk ridges that connect the south of England to France. The English Channel is born not as a polite strait, but as a violent breakthrough of rushing tides. Britain is cut adrift. The peninsula becomes an island. The psychological impact of this severance must have been profound. To look across the water and see a land that was once accessible, now separated by a treacherous, impassable barrier of gray waves. Across the world, the same story plays out in 1,000 different languages. In Southeast Asia, the Sundaland continent, a massive landmass connecting Vietnam, Malaysia, and Indonesia, is submerged. Half a continent vanishes, leaving only the mountain peaks sticking out of the water to form the archipelago of islands we see today. The tigers, the elephants, and the orangutans are isolated on these shrinking lifeboats of land. In the extreme north, the most significant door in human history is swinging shut. The Bering Land Bridge, the grassy highway that had allowed the first Americans to cross from Siberia, is sinking. The Pacific and Arctic oceans meet, swirling together in a cold embrace. The connection is severed. The peoples of the Americas are now cut off from the rest of the human family, destined to develop in solitude for 10,000 years. The old world and the new world are divorced by the rising tide. The coastline of the world is in flux. What was once a straight, smooth shore is being flooded to create complex estuaries, bays, and inlets. The rising sea invades the river valleys, creating the great harbors of Sydney, San Francisco, and New York. These natural ports, which will one day host the greatest cities of the modern era, are carved by the rising waters of the melting ice. But amidst this destruction, there is creation. The rising waters bring with them the moderating influence of the ocean. The harsh continental extremes of the Ice Age, the blistering cold winters and the dry summers, are softened. The oceans act as a global heat sink, stabilizing the temperature. The moisture from the expanding seas fuels the rains that will turn the barren rock into soil. The chaos of the flood years eventually begins to settle. The catastrophic pulses of meltwater slow down as the great ice sheets of North America and Scandinavia finally vanish, leaving only their remnants in Greenland and Antarctica. The sea levels stabilize, finding a new equilibrium roughly 120 meters higher than before. But the scars remain. If you know where to look, you can see the violence of the transition written on the land. You can see it in the erratic boulders perched on mountainsides, dropped there by melting icebergs that floated on temporary inland seas. You can see it in the deep U-shaped valleys carved by glaciers and then filled with seawater to create fjords. And we carry the memory of this time in our collective consciousness. Nearly every culture on Earth, from the Sumerians to the First Nations of America, carries a myth of a great flood. A time when the gods were angry, when the waters rose to swallow the mountains, and when humanity was forced to flee to the highest peaks. These are not just stories. They are the trauma of the species, passed down through 10,000 generations. They are the eyewitness accounts of the time when the ice failed and the oceans returned. The roar of the rising waters has quieted now, replaced by the rhythmic lapping of the waves against the modern shore. But we must never forget that our current coastlines are temporary. We live on a planet where the boundary between land and sea is drawn in pencil, not ink. The water has risen before, and it waits, patient and heavy, to rise again. As the waters settle and the new shape of the continents is revealed, the stage is set for the next act in the drama of recovery. The land, stripped bare by ice, and washed clean by floods, is raw and empty. It is a blank canvas of gray rock and mud, waiting for the touch of life. The water has done its work. It has prepared the ground. Now the Green Army is gathering at the edges of the desolation, ready to march north. The colonization of the New World is about to begin. The water has receded. The ice has withdrawn to the high latitudes, huddling in the polar circles like a defeated army. The floods have drained into the widening seas, leaving behind a world that is, for the first time in 100,000 years, naked. If you were to walk across the northern hemisphere in the immediate aftermath of the Great Melt, you would not recognize it as the verdant, living planet we know today. You would be walking across a skeleton. The retreating glaciers have scrubbed the land down to its most elemental form. There is no soil here, only the raw, gray bedrock of the continental shield. It is a landscape of scoured granite, vast fields of shattered gravel, and endless miles of wet, gray mud known as glacial till. It is a silent, monochrome world. The wind blows over it without snagging on a single branch or rustling a single leaf. It is a mineral planet, cold and hard, smelling of wet stone and crushed quartz. It looks less like the Earth and more like the surface of Mars, stripped of its red dust. But life is opportunism. Life is a pressure that pushes against every vacuum, seeking purchase in the most hostile of cracks. And on the southern edges of this gray wasteland, the Green Army is gathering. It is not an army of soldiers, but of spores, seeds, and microscopic tendrils. They are preparing for the greatest migration in biological history, the reclamation of the North. The first wave of this invasion is invisible to the naked eye. It arrives on the wind. Microscopic bacteria and fungal spores drift through the air, landing on the sterile rock. They are the scouts. But the true pioneers, the first visible colonizers of the stone, are the lichens. Lichen is a biological miracle, a partnership between a fungus and an alga so intimate that they function as a single organism. They do not need soil, they do not need roots, they only need sunlight and a rock. They appear first as splashes of color on the gray granite. Burnt orange, fluorescent yellow, pale sea foam green. They look like paint, splattered by an abstract artist, but they are slow-burning chemical factories. Watch them work over the span of centuries. The lichen clings to the rock with a grip that can withstand hurricane winds. It secretes mild acids that slowly, agonizingly etch the surface of the stone. It dissolves the minerals, breaking the molecular bonds of the mountain itself. It is eating the earth. As the lichen lives and dies, its tiny body decomposes, mixing with the rock dust it has created. This is the birth of soil. It is a primitive thin dust, barely enough to cover a fingernail, but it is the foundation of all terrestrial life. It is the bridge between the mineral world and the biological world. Once the lichen has established a foothold, the second wave attacks. These are the mosses. They arrive in the damp shadows, swelling with water, forming soft, emerald cushions over the hard edges of the boulders. They act as sponges, trapping moisture and dust, building the soil layer millimeter by millimeter. They die, they rot, and they build the bed for what comes next. Now, the first true plants arrive. They are not the towering giants of the forest, but the humble, tough warriors of the tundra. The most famous among them is a small, creeping shrub with a cheerful, 8-petaled white flower, Dryas octopetala, or the mountain avens. This flower is so significant to the history of the planet that entire climatic periods are named after it. It is a survivor. It hugs the ground to escape the biting wind, its leaves leathery and tough. But its secret weapon lies underground. The roots of the dryas form a partnership with bacteria that can pull nitrogen directly from the air and fix it into the soil. Nitrogen is the fuel of life, the fertilizer that makes growth possible. In a world stripped of nutrients by the ice, the dryas is an engine of fertility. It creates its own food. As it spreads across the gravel bars and the moraines, it leaves behind a wake of rich, dark earth. It paves the road for the succession that follows. Stand on a ridge in this era, 5,000 years after the ice began to melt. The gray is disappearing. A fuzz of green has settled over the valleys. The silence of the rock is being replaced by the sound of life. The wind now hisses through the dry stalks of sedges and hardy grasses. The air smells different. It no longer smells only of wet stone. It smells of decay, of growth, of sweetness. It smells of the earth waking up. And then, on the southern horizon, the trees appear. The migration of a forest is a phenomenon that is difficult for the human mind to grasp because it happens on a timescale that renders us impatient. We think of trees as static, rooted things, but trees are travelers. They move not by walking, but by dying and being born again a little further ahead. The first trees to cross the wasteland are the light lovers, the fast growers, the risk takers, the birch and the aspen. They are the shock troops of the canopy. Their seeds are tiny, winged flecks that can travel kilometers on a stiff breeze. They land in the thin soil prepared by the mosses and the dryas. They germinate quickly, shooting up thin, white trunks that reflect the sunlight. A young birch forest is a place of light and energy. The canopy is thin, allowing the sun to reach the ground, encouraging the growth of berry bushes and wildflowers. These forests shimmer. The leaves of the aspen tremble in the slightest breeze, a shimmering curtain of green and silver that whispers constantly. They live fast and they die young, their rotting trunks adding massive amounts of organic matter to the ground, deepening the soil, preparing it for something heavier. Behind the birch and aspen come the conifers, the spruce, the pine, the fir. These are the dark lords of the north. They are slower, more deliberate. They cast a deep, permanent shadow that starves the light-loving. Birches. Their needles are acidic, changing the chemistry of the soil, creating a thick, soft carpet of duff that muffles the sound of footsteps. When the spruce forest arrives, the landscape changes character. It becomes serious. The light turns moody and filtered. The air becomes infused with the sharp, clean scent of resin and terpenes. These trees are built for the cold that still lingers in the winter nights. Their conical shapes shed the snow. Their evergreen needles allow them to photosynthesize the moment the spring sun touches them. They are the vast, dark blanket that we now call the taiga, wrapping around the shoulders of the world. But the succession does not stop there. Far to the south, in the warmer refuges of Europe and North America, the heavyweights are moving. The great deciduous hardwoods, the oaks, the maples, the elms, the lindens. Their migration is slower. They do not have the light, wind-blown seeds of the birch. They rely on heavy nuts, acorns, walnuts, chestnuts. They need help to move. They recruit the animal kingdom. Consider the Eurasian jay or the gray squirrel. These creatures are the unwitting gardeners of the post-glacial world. They gather the acorns from the southern forests and fly or run north, burying them in the ground to store them for winter. They are planting the future. They forget millions of these caches. And from these forgotten pantries, the great oaks spring up, kilometers ahead of their parents. It is a partnership of staggering complexity. The bird needs the tree for food. The tree needs the bird for mobility. Together, they march north at a pace of perhaps 300 or 400 meters a year. It seems agonizingly slow to us, but in geological time it is a sprint. The forest is racing to catch up with the climate. As these great forests mature, they transform the very atmosphere of the planet. A mature oak forest is a biological engine of immense power. Millions of leaves unfurl in the spring, acting as solar panels that capture the energy of the sun. They suck carbon dioxide from the air, locking it away in their wood, and breathe out pure, cool oxygen. The humidity rises. The forest creates its own weather. The water vapor released by the transpiration of billions of trees gathers into clouds, triggering rain that falls back onto the canopy, sustaining the cycle. The forest is no longer just living on the land. It is shaping the land. The roots grip the soil, stopping the erosion that defined the meltwater era. The rivers run clear and clean, filtered by the mats of vegetation. There is a profound philosophical beauty in the concept of the climax forest. This is the state of equilibrium, where the vegetation has reached its maximum potential for the local climate. Walking into an ancient, old-growth forest that has reestablished itself after the ice is like entering a cathedral. The light here is green and submarine. The trees are immense pillars that vanish into a ceiling of leaves. The ground is soft, covered in ferns and shade-loving flowers. There is a sense of timelessness. It feels as though this forest has always been here, that it is the natural state of the earth. We forget that only a few thousand years ago, this very spot was crushed under 3 kilometers of ice. We forget that this tranquility is the result of a violent, desperate struggle for survival. For the humans living in this era, the arrival of the forest changes everything. The open tundras, where they could see the mammoth herds for miles, are gone. The world has become closed in, intimate, and mysterious. They are now the people of the woods. They must learn a new way of life. They learn the properties of the wood, which timber burns hottest, which bends best for a bow, which resists the rot of the water for a canoe. They learn the secrets of the undergrowth, the medicinal herbs, the poisonous berries, the edible roots. The forest becomes their larder, their pharmacy, and their temple. They also learn fear. The open plains offered visibility. The forest offers ambush. The shadows are deep. The trees hide predators. The mythology of humanity shifts from the sky spirits of the open tundra to the wood spirits, the dryads, the shapeshifters who dwell in the dark heart of the grove. The forest becomes a place of magic and danger. Let us pause and admire the resilience of the seed. A seed is a capsule of time. It is a tiny vessel containing the genetic code of a giant, wrapped in a protective coat, waiting for the signal to wake. It can lie dormant in the frozen mud for years, preserving the spark of life until the conditions are right. It is the ultimate act of hope. During the recovery from the Ice Age, the soil of the earth was filled with this hope. As the warmth returned, the seeds that had been waiting, or that had been carried north by the wind and the birds, exploded into life. They stitched the wounded planet back together. They covered the scars of the glaciers with a living blanket of green. This green canopy is more than just scenery. It is the skin of the earth. It regulates the temperature, protecting the ground from the harsh sun and the biting wind. It cycles the nutrients, turning death into life. It provides the habitat for the birds, the insects, and the mammals that follow in its wake. As we reach the period known as the Holocene climatic optimum, the warmest, most lush period of the recovery, the Earth is unrecognizable from the white marble it was just a few thousand years prior. It is a jewel of emerald and sapphire. The continents are draped in deep, continuous forests that stretch unbroken from the Atlantic to the Pacific. A squirrel could theoretically travel from the coast of France to the Ural Mountains in Russia without ever touching the ground, jumping from branch to branch in a canopy that spans a continent. It is a world of abundance. The photosynthesis is running at maximum efficiency. The planet is breathing deeply. This recovery, this greening of the gray, is perhaps the greatest success story in the history of life. It teaches us that the Earth is not fragile in the long term. It is resilient. It has a memory of life that cannot be erased by ice or fire. Given time, given warmth, and given the tireless work of the lichen and the seed, the life will return. The stage is now set. The ice is gone. The water has settled. The forest has built the house. Now, the tenants must move in. The great megafauna of the Ice Age are facing a world that no longer suits them, and new creatures, adapted to the shadows of the woods, are rising to take their place. The drama of the landscape is ending. The drama of extinction and survival is about to begin. There is a specific, heavy quality to the air when a world is ending. It is not the sharp, crystalline bite of the glacial winter, nor the fresh, energetic breeze of the coming spring. It is a humid, thick stillness. It smells of wet fur, of fermenting peat, and of a landscape that is changing faster than the creatures living upon it can comprehend. We have arrived at the twilight of the giants. For 100,000 years, the northern hemisphere was the domain of the megafauna. It was a kingdom ruled by titans: the woolly mammoth, the woolly rhinoceros, the cave lion, the giant Irish elk. These were biological masterpieces engineered by evolution to dominate the mammoth steppe. This biome, which has no true modern equivalent, was a dry, cold grassland that stretched endlessly across the top of the world. It was a hard land, yes, but it was firm underfoot and rich in nutrients. But as the ice retreats and the green canopy marches north, this kingdom is being dismantled, acre by acre. Imagine the perspective of a matriarch mammoth. She is an ancient being, carrying the memory of the herd in her massive domed skull. She remembers the routes her mother taught her, the vast open corridors where the wind kept the biting insects at bay, and the sweet steppe grasses grew waist-high. But now, those corridors are closing. She walks north, seeking the cold, seeking the dry lands. But everywhere she turns, the world has become soft and treacherous. The permafrost, once as hard as concrete, has turned into a sponge. Her feet, designed to trek across frozen plains, now sink deep into the thawing muskeg. Every step is a labor. The mud sucks at her legs, exhausting her, slowing the herd's migration to a crawl. And then there are the trees. To us, the spreading forests of birch and pine are a sign of recovery and life. To the mammoth, they are an invading army. They are a green cage. The forest blocks the wind, allowing clouds of mosquitoes and black flies to swarm in unprecedented numbers, tormenting the animals, driving them to distraction. The trees shade out the nutritious grasses, replacing them with toxic ferns and mosses that provide no sustenance for a 6-ton furnace that needs to burn 200 kilograms of food a day. The great tragedy of the megafauna is not just that the world got warmer. It is that their food disappeared. They are starving in a landscape that looks lush. We can visualize a scene of profound melancholy, a solitary woolly rhinoceros, a creature resembling a tank comprised of muscle and hair, standing at the edge of a dense spruce forest. It lowers its head, swinging its massive keratin horn, a tool designed to sweep away light snow to reveal grass. But here, there is no grass. There are only thick roots and damp, rotting needles. The rhino snorts, confused by the scent of resin and mold. It turns back, looking for a path that no longer exists. It is a king whose castle has crumbled into a swamp. In the shadows of this collapsing empire, a new power is rising, the human being. Our ancestors have lived alongside these giants for millennia. They have painted them on the walls of caves in France and Spain, rendering their humped backs and curved tusks with a reverence that borders on worship. They have hunted them, yes, but in the open plains, the mammoth was a formidable opponent, often unassailable. But the balance of power is shifting. The changing landscape favors the hunter, not the prey. The dense forests provide cover. The humans, agile and adaptable, move through the undergrowth like ghosts. They have developed new technologies, lighter spears, spear throwers, atlatls that extend the leverage of the arm, and perhaps the assistance of the first domesticated wolves. They are no longer just scavengers or opportunistic hunters. They are becoming apex predators. Consider the intimacy of a hunt in this era. It is not a chaotic, bloodthirsty brawl. It is a slow, silent stalk. A group of hunters tracks a small, isolated pod of mammoths that have been separated from the main herd by a rising river. The humans wear the skins of the animals they hunt. They smell like the earth. They move only when the wind howls in the trees. They know the mammoth is in trouble. They can see its ribs pressing against its matted coat. They can see the exhaustion in its gait. There is no malice in their hearts, only the desperate, pragmatic need for survival. One mammoth means meat for a winter. It means bone for tools, hide for shelter, fat for the lamps that keep the darkness at bay. When the strike comes, it is precise. A flurry of movement in the dappled light of the forest, the flight of stone-tipped spears, the bellow of the beast, a sound that shakes the leaves from the trees. And then the silence returns. There is a theory known as the overkill hypothesis, which suggests that humans were the primary architects of this extinction. But this view perhaps gives us too much credit and simplifies the tragedy. It was likely a 1-2 punch. The climate stressed the populations, fragmented their herds, and trapped them in shrinking islands of habitat. The humans simply delivered the coup de grace. We were the final straw on a back already broken by the heat. As the centuries pass, the giants fade. It is not a sudden disappearance. It is a slow flickering out, like stars vanishing at dawn. The range of the mammoth contracts. They retreat to the extreme edges of the continents, to the Taimyr Peninsula in Siberia, to the pockets of relic grassland in the Yukon. The gene pool shrinks. Inbreeding sets in, weakening the majestic lines. We see evidence of this in the fossil record. Cervical ribs, fused bones, signs of a species collapsing from within. The loss is auditory as well as visual. For 100,000 years, the northern nights were filled with the trumpeting calls of mammoths, the low-frequency rumbles that could travel for miles through the ground, the roar of the cave lion. One by one, these voices are silenced. The soundscape of the Holocene becomes quieter. The wind in the pines takes over, accompanied only by the howl of the wolf and the song of the bird. There is a haunting poignancy in the story of the very last mammoths. While the pyramids were being built in Egypt, while the first civilizations were rising in Sumer, a small dwarf population of woolly mammoths still clung to existence on Wrangel Island, isolated in the Arctic Ocean. They were the final ghosts of the Ice Age, walking in circles on a speck of land, surrounded by a rising sea, unaware that they were the last of their kind. And then, one day, the last one died. Perhaps it fell into a ravine. Perhaps it succumbed to a bacteria its weakened immune system could not fight. Perhaps it simply lay down in the snow, too old and too tired to rise again. With its last breath, an unbroken biological chain stretching back millions of years was severed. The era of the monsters was over, but the extinction of the megafauna opened the door for the modern world. The disappearance of the great herbivores changed the land even further. Without the mammoths to knock down trees and trample the saplings, the forest spread even faster. The birch and pine cemented their victory. The carbon cycle of the planet shifted. In the vacuum left by the giants, other creatures flourished. The era of the browser and the grazer gave way to the era of the elusive forest dweller. The populations of red deer, moose, wild boar, and bear exploded. These animals were smaller, faster, and better suited to the dense cover of the woods. They did not try to fight the forest. They became part of it, and the humans adapted with them. We stopped being the hunters of giants and became the hunters of the shadow. We developed the bow and arrow, a weapon requiring stealth and precision, perfectly designed for the silent warfare of the woods. We learned to fish the teeming rivers that the meltwater had created. We began to clear small patches of the forest, creating our own artificial glades to encourage the growth of plants we liked, the ancestors of wheat, barley, and rye. We stopped following the herds and started building the hearth. Yet, the memory of the ice giants never truly left us. It is woven into our DNA, a trauma and a wonder that persists. Why do we, as children, feel an instinctive awe when we see an elephant? Why do our oldest myths almost speak of dragons and monsters in the wilderness? Perhaps these are the faint genetic echoes of the time when we shared the earth with titans. We walk on the bones of a lost world. Beneath the streets of London, the cornfields of Iowa, and the frozen tundra of Siberia, the tusks and skulls lie sleeping in the soil. They are the foundation upon which our modern civilization is built. Every time a farmer's plow strikes a large stone that turns out to be a molar the size of a brick, the ghost of the Ice Age breaks through the surface of the present. The transition is complete. The ice is gone, the water has settled, the forest has conquered, the giants are dead. The planet has successfully navigated the chaotic, violent bottleneck of the deglaciation. It has shed its white winter coat and donned the green mantle of the interglacial. It is a younger, faster, warmer world. But balance is a delicate thing. The Earth has found a new equilibrium, a Goldilocks zone of climate stability that will allow for the most unprecedented explosion of cultural complexity the universe has ever seen. We call this period the Holocene. It is the garden in which we will grow. However, as we stand in this lush, vibrant world, surrounded by the songs of birds and the rustle of leaves, we must ask ourselves, is this a permanent state? Or is this merely a brief, beautiful pause between the freeze and the fire? The Ice Age did not just end, it retreated. And in the deep time of geology, a retreat is often just a strategic withdrawal before the next advance. The stage is cleared. The actors have changed. The climate is stable. The long summer of humanity is about to begin. We have arrived at the present moment, or rather, the long golden afternoon of the Earth's history. Geologists call this epoch the Holocene, which translates from the Greek as entirely new. But to the human spirit, it feels less like a novelty and more like a home. It is the only climate that recorded history has ever known. It is the stable platform upon which we have built the entirety of our civilization, our art, our science, and our dreams. If you were to graph the temperature of the planet over the last 100,000 years, you would see a line that looks like the frantic heartbeat of a runner. Wild spikes of heat followed by sudden, jagged plunges into the deep freeze. Chaos was the norm. Stability was the anomaly. But then, roughly 11,700 years ago, the line flattens out. It becomes a calm, steady horizon. The fever broke, the chills ceased, and the Earth entered a state of rare and delicate equilibrium. This stability is the silent miracle that we wake up to every day. It is the predictability of the seasons. It is the promise that if you plant a seed in the spring, the rains will come, the sun will shine, and there will be a harvest in the autumn. This simple contract between the sky and the soil was impossible during the volatile swings of the Ice Age. But in the Holocene, the contract held firm. And because of this contract, humanity stopped running. We put down the spear and picked up the plow. We stopped following the migration of the herds and started listening to the rhythm of the river. In the fertile crescents of the Middle East, in the river valleys of China, and along the banks of the Nile, we began to domesticate the wild grasses. We took the energy of the sun, stored in a grain of wheat or rice, and we built silos. We invented the concept of the future, a time that could be planned for, saved for, and relied upon. From this surplus of energy, cities rose like coral reefs made of stone. Writing was invented, initially to track the movement of grain and cattle, but soon used to record the movements of the soul. Laws were written. Temples were raised to the gods of the weather, begging them to maintain the balance. We became a species defined by our ability to manipulate the environment rather than merely enduring it. But as we sit here in the comfort of our modern world, surrounded by the glass and steel of our achievements, we often suffer from a collective amnesia. We look at the concrete beneath our feet and assume it is the foundation of the world. We forget that we are building on top of a system that is dynamic, breathing, and incredibly fragile. The Holocene is not a permanent state. It is a pause. It is a temporary truce between the freezing cold of space and the molten heat of the Earth's core. It is a Goldilocks moment where the tilt of the axis, the shape of the orbit, and the composition of the atmosphere have aligned perfectly to keep the ice at bay. Look at the atmosphere today. It is a thin, glowing ribbon of gas wrapped around the planet, no thicker relative to the Earth than the skin of an apple is to the fruit. It is a cocktail of nitrogen, oxygen, argon, and trace amounts of carbon dioxide. It is this specific mixture maintained by the breathing of the forests and the oceans that keeps the temperature stable. It is a system of checks and balances so intricate that it defies full comprehension. The ocean absorbs the heat. The currents distribute it from the equator to the poles. The white caps of the remaining polar ice reflect just enough sunlight to keep us cool. The clouds form a blanket that traps the heat at night. It is a global dance of energy where every dancer is perfectly in step. But there are ghosts in the room. If you travel to the high plateau of Greenland or the frozen heart of Antarctica, you can still find the Ice Age. It never truly left. It just retreated to the fortress of the poles. These ice sheets are the museums of the cold. They are miles deep, preserving the ancient snows of 100,000 years ago. Scientists drill into this ice, pulling up long, clear cylinders of frozen history. In the tiny bubbles of air trapped within the ice, they read the atmosphere of the past. They see the record of the dust storms, the volcanic eruptions, and the changing levels of greenhouse gases. The ice tells us a sobering story. The climate can change with terrifying speed. The steady state we enjoy is an exception, not the rule. And now, we must confront the most profound realization of our time. We, the children of the Holocene, have become a geological force. We are no longer just inhabitants of the biosphere, we are drivers of it. Through our industry, our agriculture, and our sheer numbers, we have begun to turn the dials of the planetary machine. We have dug up the carbon, the fossilized sunlight of ancient forests buried millions of years ago, and released it back into the atmosphere in the blink of a geological eye. We have touched the thermostat. The atmosphere is responding. The ocean is warming. The ice, which has slept for 10,000 years, is stirring again. The glaciers are retreating, not because of a natural orbital cycle, but because of the heat we have generated. The sea levels are rising, gnawing at the coastlines we thought were permanent. There is a deep irony here. The very stability that allowed us to build a civilization capable of changing the climate is now threatened by that same civilization. We are like a potter who has spun the wheel so fast that the clay is beginning to wobble. But this is not a story of despair. It is a story of awakening. Just as our ancestors woke up to the possibilities of agriculture, we are waking up to the responsibilities of planetary stewardship. We are the first species in the history of life to understand the mechanism of our own existence. The woolly mammoth did not know why the grass was dying. We do. We have the satellites that watch the weather. We have the computer models that predict the future. We have the knowledge of the Milankovitch cycles, the carbon cycle, and the water cycle. We see the delicate threads that hold the web of life together. This knowledge brings with it a profound sense of perspective. When we look at the Earth from space, we do not see borders. We do not see nations or economies. We see a single blue marble swirling with white clouds, floating in the empty silence of the void. We see a closed system. Everything we have, everything we are, is contained within that thin biosphere. The recovery from the Ice Age taught us that life is resilient. It survived the crushing weight of the glaciers. It survived the floods. It colonized the bare rock. Life is tough. The bacteria, the lichen, the cockroaches, they will likely survive whatever comes next. The question is not whether life will continue, but whether the specific, comfortable, stable conditions that support us will continue. The long summer of humanity is a gift, but it is not a guarantee. As we look to the future, we must adopt the patience of the glacier and the wisdom of the forest. We must learn to think in deep time. We are not just living for ourselves or for the next fiscal quarter. We are the custodians of a continuity that stretches back to the first spark of life in the primordial soup. We are the mind of the planet. We are the way the Earth knows itself. Imagine the Earth 10,000 years from now. What will the geological record show of our time? Will it show a thin layer of plastic and radioactive dust, a scar of a species that consumed everything and burned itself out? Or will it show a transition? A moment where the intelligence of the planet matured, where we learned to balance our hunger with the limits of the system, where we became the gardeners of the Holocene rather than its miners. The celestial clockwork is still turning. The Earth is still wobbling on its axis. The orbit is still shifting. In the distant future, thousands of years from now, the geometry of the solar system will once again favor the cold. The sunlight hitting the north will weaken. The snows will fail to melt in the summer. The White Empire will try to return. But by then, perhaps we will have learned enough to keep the ice at bay without destroying the garden. Perhaps we will have become a true Type 1 civilization, living in harmony with the energy of our star and the cycles of our world. For now, however, we live in the beautiful, fragile present. Take a moment to feel the ground beneath your feet. It is solid, but it is floating on a sea of magma. Take a moment to breathe the air. It is sweet and oxygen-rich, a gift from the plankton and the pines. Look at the water in your glass. It is the same water that was locked in the Laurentide Ice Sheet, the same water that flooded Doggerland, the same water that watered the first crops in Mesopotamia. It has cycled through the ice, the ocean, the cloud, and the river to reach you. We are connected to the Ice Age, just as we are connected to the stars. We are the survivors of the freeze, the children of the thaw, and the architects of the future. The story of the Earth's recovery is a story of patience. It is a story of how the slow, relentless power of warmth can overcome the hardest obstacles. It is a reminder that after the darkest, coldest winter, the spring always comes. The sun always rises, the water always flows. As night falls over our hemisphere and the stars wheel overhead in their ancient, silent courses, we can rest in the knowledge that we are part of something immense and enduring. The planet is breathing. The seasons are turning. The great wheel of life continues to spin. We are small, yes. Our lives are brief flashes of light in the deep canyon of geological time. But we are here. We are witnessing the universe. We are the eyes of the world,